What happens when you climb into your attic for Halloween decorations and hear footsteps in the corner where no one should be? When a skeleton-costumed stranger at your party knows exactly where your parents keep their safe? When a clown masked figure throws rocks at your girlfriend, then cuts your power and waits in your backyard? When a supposedly empty house on the corner has fresh candy bags arranged in its dark hallway? When someone returns your personalized Halloween treat bag, along with private information they pulled from your trash? Tonight we bring you 5 accounts of Halloween home invasions that prove the scariest intruders aren't supernatural. They are real people who use costumes, parties, and October traditions as cover for calculated attacks on suburban families who thought locked doors and neighborhood watch signs meant safety. From attics where homeless men hide among Christmas decorations to house parties infiltrated by older strangers casing valuables. From motion lights that reveal stalkers in clown masks to abandoned houses rigged with cameras and traps. From data harvesting predators who study your recycling to learn your schedule. These stories reveal the Halloween tradition of strangers coming to your door becomes terrifying when some of those strangers have been watching your house for weeks and know things about your family they shouldn't know. The footsteps overhead that aren't rats. The costume party guest who isn't a guest. The figure in your yard who planned the power outage. The empty house that somehow knows your name. The polite visitor returning candy who's actually returning surveillance. This is what happens when home invasion wears a Halloween mask and your biggest security vulnerability is the holiday that invites strangers to ring your doorbell. My name is Marcus, and I was 16 on a Halloween Saturday in 2019 when I discovered someone had been living in our attic for at least 24 hours before we found him. The day started with heavy rain and wind, the kind of storm that makes staying inside feel cozy rather than confining. My mother, Emily, had decided that morning that our Halloween decorations were insufficient, that the inflatable pumpkin on the porch and the string lights around the door didn't properly represent our family's holiday spirit. She insisted I go up to the attic and bring down the boxes of additional decorations we'd accumulated over the years, the ceramic witches and the fake cobwebs and the motion-activated cackling skeleton that had terrified me as a child. The attic access was a pull-down ladder in the hallway ceiling, the kind with a rope handle you tug to release the folding steps. I climbed up with my phone flashlight since the attic had only a single bare bulb that barely illuminated the space. The attic was hot despite the rain outside, that stifling heat that builds up under roof shingles, and it smelled of dust and old cardboard and something else I couldn't quite identify, something organic and slightly unpleasant like unwashed clothes or body odor. I assumed it was just the mustiness of a space that hadn't been ventilated in months, and moved toward the corner where we kept the holiday boxes stacked against the far wall. That's when I heard it. The distinct creak of wood settling in the opposite corner, the sound of weight shifting on the attic floor joists. I froze with my hand on a box labeled Halloween Outdoor and listened. Another creak, then silence so complete it felt deliberate, like something was holding its breath waiting to see if I'd notice. My first rational thought was rats or squirrels, but the weight suggested something much larger than rodents. My heart started pounding as I slowly turned my phone light toward the sound, sweeping it across dusty boxes and exposed insulation. I didn't see anything in that first sweep, just shadows and the normal clutter of an attic that serves as long-time storage. But the smell was stronger in that corner, that unwashed scent I'd noticed earlier, and I had the sudden terrible certainty that I wasn't alone up there. I grabbed the Halloween box closest to me and descended the ladder faster than was probably safe, nearly dropping it on my mother who was waiting below. "Did you get everything?" she asked, but I was already pulling the ladder back up and closing the attic access, my hand shaking as I secured the latch. I told her I'd get more later, that I needed to use the bathroom, and spent the next 10 minutes sitting on the edge of the tub trying to convince myself I'd imagined the sounds and the wrongness I'd felt in that corner. But what I didn't know in that moment, what none of us knew as we went about our normal Halloween preparations downstairs, was that someone was indeed living in our attic, had been for over a day, and was watching through the cracks in the attic floor as our family moved through the house below, learning our routines and waiting for nightfall when the real terror would begin. By 11 p.m. that Halloween night, I was in my room playing video games with my headset on, my parents Thomas and Emily asleep down the hall, the house quiet except for the occasional drum of rain against windows and the sound effects from my game. I was mid-match when I heard something that made me pause the game and pull off my headset. Footsteps, directly above my room. Heavy, deliberate footsteps that were unmistakably human, not the scurrying of animals or the random settling of old house wood. Someone was walking around in our attic at 11 p.m. on Halloween night. I sat frozen for a moment listening to the footsteps move across the ceiling, following a path from the far corner toward the attic access above the hallway. Then came a new sound, the creak of the attic ladder being lowered, metal hinges that needed oil protesting as someone pulled down the folding steps from above. My door was open, and I had a direct line of sight down the hallway to where the attic access was located. I watched in horror as the ladder descended slowly, inch by inch, until it locked into position with a soft click that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet house. The realization hit me like ice water. Whoever was in our attic was coming down, into our house, while my parents slept and I sat paralyzed in my room trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't imagination or rats or house settling. This was a real person who'd been hiding above us all day and was now descending into our home in the middle of the night. I finally broke from my paralysis and moved quickly but quietly to my parents' room, opening their door and shaking my father's shoulder urgently. "Dad," I whispered, my voice barely audible even to myself. "Wake up. Someone's in the house." Someone came down from the attic. Thomas sat up immediately, that instant alertness parents develop when their children report danger. He didn't question me or suggest I was mistaken. He just got out of bed, grabbed his phone, and moved to the doorway to look down the hall. From our position in the master bedroom, we could see the hallway and the extended attic ladder, but we couldn't see if anyone was actually on it or had already descended. Thomas motioned for me and Emily, who'd woken up to my urgent whispering to stay in the room, then crept forward to get a better view. He was only 3 steps into the hallway when he stopped abruptly and backed up rapidly, his face gone pale in the dim light from the hallway nightlight. "There's someone," he whispered. "I saw someone going up the ladder, like they went down to the kitchen, and now they're going back up." We didn't debate what to do or try to confront the intruder ourselves. Thomas locked our bedroom door, a flimsy interior lock that wouldn't stop anyone determined, but at least provided psychological barrier and warning if the door was tried. He dialed 911 on his cell phone and spoke in a low, urgent voice explaining that someone was in our house, in our attic, that we'd locked ourselves in the bedroom and needed police immediately. The dispatcher stayed on the line, her calm, professional voice telling us help was coming, asking questions about how many people, if we'd seen weapons, if anyone was injured. The 8 minutes it took for police to arrive felt like hours as we huddled in the master bedroom listening for sound from the attic or hallway, trying to determine if the intruder knew we'd discovered them or was still operating under the assumption we were asleep and unaware. We heard movement above, footsteps moving back to that far corner where I'd first heard creaking that afternoon, then silence that suggested whoever it was had settled into position waiting. When we finally heard sirens approaching and saw red and blue lights painting our walls through the bedroom windows, the relief was so intense it made me dizzy and nauseous. 4 officers responded to our 911 call. 2 entered through the front door we unlocked for them, while 2 positioned themselves outside in case the intruder tried to flee through a window or roof access. The lead officer, a woman named Sergeant Davis, had her weapon drawn but held low as she and her partner approached the attic access. "This is the police," she called up into the darkness above the ladder. "We know you're up there. Come down slowly with your hands visible. This is your only warning." Silence answered her for a long moment. Then came a voice from the attic, male, rough, sounding tired or defeated rather than aggressive. "I'm coming down. I'm not armed. Please don't shoot." A man descended the ladder slowly, his hands raised and visibly empty, moving with a careful deliberation of someone who'd been through arrest procedures before and knew not to make sudden movements around armed police. He was maybe in his mid-30s, thin and dirty, wearing a jacket that looked expensive but hadn't been washed in weeks, jeans caked with grime. His face was unshaven and his hair tangled, eyes squinting in the hallway light after however many hours he'd spent in the dim attic. Officers directed him to lie face down on the floor while they cuffed him and patted him down for weapons, finding none but discovering a wallet in his pocket that identified him as Daniel Reeves, last known address a homeless shelter 2 towns over. What we learned in the hours that followed, pieced together from Daniel's statement and the evidence officers found in our attic, explained the sounds I'd heard and the smell that had made me uneasy, and revealed just how close we'd come to a much worse encounter than the one we'd actually experienced. Because Daniel Reeves had been living in our attic for over 24 hours, had been there when I went up for Halloween decorations that morning, had watched through cracks in the floorboards as our family moved through the house below, going about our normal routines, completely unaware of his presence. Officers who searched the attic found a corner nest where Daniel had set up what appeared to be temporary residence. One of our family's spare blankets spread on the floor between boxes, an empty jar of peanut butter with spoon marks suggesting he'd eaten directly from it, several water bottles we kept stored in the attic for emergencies now empty, and a bucket he'd apparently been using as a toilet to avoid making trips to our actual bathroom. He'd brought nothing with him into the attic, had used only items he'd found already stored there, suggesting this was opportunistic rather than premeditated. He'd simply been looking for shelter from the storm Friday night, found our back door unlocked, and when he heard us returning home, he panicked and gone up into the attic thinking he'd hide briefly and leave once the house was quiet. But one night turned into two as the storm continued, and our family maintained normal activities that never gave him a safe opportunity to descend and leave without being seen. So he'd stayed hidden in the attic, living on our stored peanut butter and water, listening to our lives happen below him, waiting for a moment that hadn't come until he'd given up and decided to try leaving after we were asleep. The footsteps I'd heard that afternoon were him adjusting position when his legs cramped. The sounds at 11 p.m. were him finally attempting to leave, going down to our kitchen to get more food for his journey before climbing back up when he heard my video game sound stop and feared I was coming to investigate. The police arrested Daniel for breaking and entering, trespassing, and theft of food items. He apologized repeatedly as they let him out, saying he'd never meant to scare anyone, had just needed somewhere warm and dry to wait out the weather, hadn't realized how long he'd end up staying or how trapped he'd become once he heard us moving around below and knew leaving meant certain discovery. Sergeant Davis told us we were fortunate, that attic squatters sometimes became violent when discovered, that confronting Daniel ourselves before police arrived could have resulted in tragedy if he'd been armed or desperate enough to fight rather than surrender. The lock on our back door was replaced with a deadbolt that couldn't be left accidentally unsecured. We installed a motion sensor in the attic that would alert us to any movement up there, and I developed a habit of checking that attic access every night before bed, making sure the ladder was up and the hatch was secure, unable to shake the memory of watching those folding steps descend on Halloween night, and knowing someone who shouldn't be there was coming down into our house. My mother never did get those extra Halloween decorations out of the attic that year. We decided the decorations we had were sufficient after all, and none of us wanted to go back up into that space where Daniel Reeves had spent 24 hours watching our family through cracks in the floor and listening to our conversations, a stranger living in our ceiling while we moved through our lives below, completely unaware of how vulnerable we actually were. My name is Jason, and I was 19 when I threw what should have been an epic Halloween party at my parents' house while they were away for the weekend visiting my grandmother. The rules were clear: invite list only. No random plus ones. No posting about the party on social media where strangers might see and show up. I'd invited maybe 40 people, mostly friends from high school and community college. People I trusted not to trash the house or do anything that would get me in serious trouble with my parents. We had a DJ in the living room, a cooler full of drinks in the kitchen, decorations throughout the downstairs that had taken my sister Megan and me all afternoon to set up. By 10 p.m. the party was in full swing. Everyone in costume ranging from elaborate store-bought outfits to last-minute thrown-together concepts. I was dressed as a vampire, Megan was a witch, and we were both playing host and making sure nothing got out of hand. Around 11 p.m. my friend Carlos pulled me aside with a concerned expression that cut through the party noise and music. "Hey man, there's some guy upstairs I've never seen before. Older dude, maybe late 30s or 40s, wearing a skeleton bodysuit. He's just walking around looking in rooms like he's casing the place. You know him." I didn't know anyone that age on my invite list, and the detail about him looking in rooms rather than socializing immediately triggered alarm bells in my mind. Because parties attract opportunistic thieves, people who see social media posts or hear through networks about houses full of distracted young people and see an opportunity to walk in, blend with the crowd, and search for valuables while everyone assumes they are just another guest. I found the skeleton-suited man on the upstairs landing, standing with his back to me looking at family photos on the wall. The costume was actually quite good. Full-body black suit with glow-in-the-dark bones printed on it, matching skull mask that covered his entire face. "Hey," I called out, trying to sound friendly rather than accusatory. "I don't think we've met. I'm Jason. This is my house. Who invited you?" The man turned slowly, his body language suggesting he was much older than the college-age crowd downstairs. His voice when he spoke confirmed it. Deep, with the roughness of someone who'd smoked for years. "I'm Mike. Your friend Tom told me about the party. Said to come by." I didn't have any friend named Tom on my invite list. "Which Tom?" I asked, moving to position myself between the stranger and the bedrooms. "From where do I know him?" Mike's posture shifted slightly, becoming defensive or calculating. "Just Tom, man. Met him at another party. Look, if I'm not welcome, I can leave." He started toward the stairs, but not before I noticed his hands were empty. No drink, no phone, nothing that suggested he'd come to socialize. He'd just been walking around upstairs looking in rooms with no apparent purpose except observation and assessment. I let him walk past me down the stairs, watched him weave through the party crowd and out the front door without speaking to anyone or looking back, and I should have felt relieved that the potential problem had removed itself. But something felt wrong about the whole encounter. The way he'd known to come upstairs where fewer people were, the way he'd been specifically looking at family photos like he was memoizing faces, the way he'd left so easily when questioned rather than trying to bluff his way into staying longer. 20 minutes after Mike left, I went back upstairs to use the bathroom and noticed my parents' bedroom door was slightly ajar. I was certain I'd closed it before the party started. We'd put certain rooms off limits and I checked all the doors myself. I pushed it open and saw immediately that someone had been in there. The closet door where my father kept a small safe stood open, and while the safe itself was still closed and locked, it was obvious someone had been examining it, checking whether it was bolted to the wall or could be easily removed. Items on my mother's dresser had been moved, her jewelry box open, and the content disturbed though nothing appeared to be missing. I ran back downstairs trying not to show panic. Found my friend Derek, who was sober and reliable, and quietly explained what I'd found. We decided not to announce anything to the party at large. Didn't want to create chaos or alert whoever had been in my parents' room that would discover the intrusion. Instead, Derek called 911 from the backyard where the music wouldn't drown out his voice, while I calmly told Megan we needed to get everyone outside for a game I'd planned. My 14-year-old sister understood immediately from my expression that something was seriously wrong, and helped me herd the party guests out to the front yard under pretense of organizing a costume contest. Once everyone was outside, I did a quick count. 4 to 2 people, including Megan and me, which matched my invite list plus a couple of legitimate plus ones I'd approved earlier in the evening. Whoever Mike was, he'd already left and wasn't coming back to rejoin the party. Police arrived within 8 minutes. 3 cars responding to Derek's 911 call about a possible burglary in progress. Most of my guests thought it was some kind of prank or party game, until officers started asking questions about suspicious people and checking IDs to match against my invite list. While officers were interviewing us on the front lawn, there was a crash from inside the house, the sound of glass breaking from somewhere on the second floor. 2 officers ran inside with weapons drawn while others kept us contained outside. What they found made my blood run cold. My parents' bedroom window was broken from the inside out, curtains whipping in the night breeze, glass scattered on the porch roof below. Someone had been inside the house the entire time we'd been standing on the lawn talking to police, hiding somewhere upstairs, and had just made their escape when they realized they were about to be discovered. Officers searched the entire house room by room but found no one, though they discovered evidence someone had been concealed in the master bedroom closet, the same closet where my father's safe was kept. Shoe prints in my mother's clothing where the intruder had stood pressed against the back wall, and the window latch had been unlocked from inside, suggesting premeditation or at least quick thinking about escape routes. The working theory was that Mike had come upstairs during the party to locate valuables, had been interrupted by my return upstairs, and had hidden in the closet when he heard me and Derek talking about calling police. He'd waited in that closet for nearly 20 minutes while the party cleared out and police arrived, then smashed the window and jumped to the porch roof the moment he realized officers were coming upstairs to search. The safe itself hadn't been opened or damaged. My father changed the combination and moved it to a bank deposit box the next day anyway, but the violation went beyond the attempted theft. This person, whoever Mike actually was, had walked into our party confident enough in his costume and his story about being invited by Tom that he blended seamlessly with younger guests and spent time upstairs casing our bedrooms. He'd either gotten incredibly lucky finding a party he could crash, or more disturbingly, he'd known about the party in advance through surveillance or leaked information, and had come specifically to rob us using the gathering as cover. We never identified Mike or determined how he'd learned about the party despite our efforts to keep it off social media. Police theorize he might have been someone who knew our family or neighborhood. Someone older who'd been inside our house before legitimately and knew the layout well enough to find the master bedroom and locate where valuables would be kept. The detail that haunted me most was a voice, older, experienced. Someone who'd clearly done this before and knew exactly how to blend into a crowd of drunk teenagers and move through a house like it belonged there while actually conducting surveillance for a crime. I never threw another party after that, and my parents installed a comprehensive security system that monitored every door and window with sensors that would alert them to any unexpected openings. Megan developed anxiety about her bedroom at night, convinced someone might be hiding in her closet like Mike had hidden in our parents', and slept with a chair propped under her doorknob for months afterward. And I learned the hard lesson that your biggest security vulnerability during a party isn't your drunk friends or loud music attracting police. It's a fact that large gatherings create perfect cover for strangers to enter your home wearing masks that are suddenly appropriate and expected rather than suspicious, moving through rooms under pretense of looking for a bathroom or getting away from noise while actually cataloging valuables and planning crimes that will happen during or after your celebration of a holiday that's supposed to be about harmless fun and community. My name is Trevor, and I was 23 when the clown masked man threw a rock at my girlfriend Sarah, and then hunted us through my house after cutting our power on Halloween night 2022. The evening had started normally enough. Sarah and I were hanging out with my friend Kyle and Marcus, the four of us dressed in casual costumes watching the few trick-or-treaters who came down our somewhat isolated street. My house backed up to empty lots and sparse woods, the kind of location where neighbors were spread out enough that screaming wouldn't necessarily bring immediate help, though I'd never thought about that vulnerability until that night when it became critically relevant to our survival. Around 9 p.m., after trick-or-treating had mostly ended, we were hanging out in the backyard talking and enjoying the unseasonably warm October weather. Sarah had just finished a story about a customer at a coffee shop where she worked when my motion-activated light clicked on, illuminating the back fence line about 50 feet from where we sat today. The light itself wasn't unusual. It triggered constantly from cats, raccoons, even large moths flying past the sensor. We looked up reflexively, so nothing obvious, and the light clicked off after its 30-second time expired. Probably just a cat, Marcus said, and we went back to our conversation. But the light clicked on again, and then off, then on again in rapid succession like something was deliberately triggering it by moving in and out of the sensor's range. Kyle stood up to get a better look, shielding his eyes against the light, and that's when the rock came flying out of the darkness beyond the fence and struck Sarah in the shoulder hard enough to make her cry out and stumble backward. The rock was baseball-sized, thrown with enough force to leave what would later become a massive bruise, and the intent behind it was unmistakably hostile. We all jumped to our feet, Kyle and Marcus moving to put themselves between Sarah and whoever had thrown the rock, mis-scanning the darkness trying to see who was out there. Then the motion light clicked on one more time and we all saw him simultaneously, a figure standing at the fence line wearing what looked like a clown mask, the cheap plastic kind you could buy at any Halloween store, but his clothes were normal street clothes, jeans and a dark hoodie. He wasn't in costume. He was using a mask to hide his face while doing something that had nothing to do with Halloween fun. The figure stood motionless staring at us for maybe 3 seconds, then turned and walked calmly into the darkness beyond my property line. "We're going inside," I said, my voice shakier than I wanted it to be. "Right now." We hurried back into the house through the back door, and I locked it behind us with hands that couldn't quite stay steady. Sarah was crying now, not from pain so much as from fear and shock, while Kyle and Marcus were both on their phone calling 911 and looking up the non-emergency police number to report someone throwing rocks in the neighborhood. I was about to suggest we all go to the living room in the front of the house, away from the backyard where the clown mask figure had been, when every light in the house went dark simultaneously. The power outage was too perfectly timed to be coincidental. No storm, no neighborhood-wide blackout visible through the windows at nearby houses whose lights remained on. Just our house suddenly plunged into darkness exactly when we retreated inside away from whoever had thrown that rock. Someone had cut our power deliberately, and the only way to restore it would be going to the generator in the shed at the back of our property, right where the masked figure had last been seen. My name is Trevor, and I was 23 when the clown masked man threw a rock at my girlfriend Sarah, and then hunted us through my house after cutting our power on Halloween night 2022. The evening had started normally enough. Sarah and I were hanging out with my friend Kyle and Marcus, The four of us dressed in casual costumes watching the few trick-or-treaters who came down our somewhat isolated street. My house backed up to empty lots and sparse woods, the kind of location where neighbors were spread out enough that screaming wouldn't necessarily bring immediate help, though I'd never thought about that vulnerability until that night when it became critically relevant to our survival. Around 9 p.m., after trick-or-treating had mostly ended, we were hanging out in the backyard talking and enjoying the unseasonably warm October weather. Sarah had just finished a story about a customer at the coffee shop where she worked when my motion-activated light clicked on, illuminating the back fence line about 50 feet from where we sat today. The light itself wasn't unusual. It triggered constantly from cats, raccoons, even large moths flying past the sensor. We looked up reflexively, so nothing obvious, and the light clicked off after its 30-second time expired. Probably just a cat, Marcus said, and we went back to our conversation. But the light clicked on again, and then off, then on again in rapid succession, like something was deliberately triggering it by moving in and out of the sensor's range. Kyle stood up to get a better look, shielding his eyes against the light, and that's when the rock came flying out of the darkness beyond the fence and struck Sarah in the shoulder hard enough to make her cry out and stumble backward. The rock was baseball size, thrown with enough force to leave what would later become a massive bruise, and the intent behind it was unmistakably hostile. We all jumped to our feet, Kyle and Marcus moving to put themselves between Sarah and whoever had thrown the rock, scanning the darkness trying to see who was out there. Then the motion light clicked on one more time, and we all saw him simultaneously, a figure standing at the fence line wearing what looked like a clown mask, the cheap plastic kind you could buy at any Halloween store. But his clothes were normal street clothes, jeans, and a dark hoodie. He wasn't in costume. He was using a mask to hide his face while doing something that had nothing to do with Halloween fun. The figure stood motionless, staring at us for maybe 3 seconds, then turned and walked calmly into the darkness beyond my property line. "We're going inside," I said, my voice shakier than I wanted it to be. "Right now." We hurried back into the house through the back door, and I locked it behind us with hands that couldn't quite stay steady. Sarah was crying now, not from pain so much as from fear and shock, while Kyle and Marcus were both on their phone calling 911 and looking up the non-emergency police number to report someone throwing rocks in the neighborhood. I was about to suggest we all go to the living room in the front of the house, away from the backyard where the clown mask figure had been, when every light in the house went dark simultaneously. The power outage was too perfectly timed to be coincidental. No storm, no neighborhood-wide blackout visible through the windows at nearby houses whose lights remained on. Just our house suddenly plunged into darkness exactly when we retreated inside away from whoever had thrown that rock. Someone had cut our power deliberately, and the only way to restore it would be going to the generator in the shed at the back of our property, right where the masked figure had last been seen. The threat hung in the air between us and the masked figure, and I felt Marcus tense beside me preparing to charge with his improvised beer bottle weapon despite the terrible odds of success. But before anyone could make a move, we heard the most beautiful sound possible in that moment. Sirens approaching, multiple units by the sound of it, getting closer rapidly. The 911 operator had apparently convinced dispatch that this was indeed an emergency situation requiring immediate response, and police were now seconds away from arrival rather than the 8 minutes we'd been originally promised. The clown mask figure's body language changed immediately, posture shifting from casual confidence to sudden alertness and calculation. He turned and ran back up the basement stairs, his footsteps now rapid and panicked rather than measured and threatening. We heard him cross the kitchen above us, heard the back door slam open, and then the sound of his escape faded as police sirens reached deafening volume right outside my house. Marcus and I ran up the stairs after him despite Sarah calling for us to wait, emerging into the kitchen just as officers were entering through my unlocked front door with weapons drawn and flashlights cutting through the darkness. "Basement! We're in the basement!" He went out the back. I shouted at the officers, trying to make myself heard over the chaos of multiple people yelling commands and questions. 2 officers immediately ran toward my back door while others secured us in the kitchen, checking if we were injured and asking rapid-fire questions about descriptions and weapons and whether we'd gotten a look at the intruder's face beneath the mask. Kyle had the presence of mind to describe the clown mask specifically, cheap plastic with red nose and painted smile, the kind sold at every Spirit Halloween store in the country, and mentioned seeing the figure wear a dark hoodie and jeans. Officers who pursued out the back door returned within minutes, reporting they'd lost a suspect in the wooded area behind my property, that he'd apparently known the terrain well enough to disappear quickly despite their flashlights and numbers. A perimeter was being set up and K9 units were en route, but the initial pursuit had failed to result in capture or even clear identification. The generator shed revealed how our power had been cut. Someone had simply opened it and flipped the main breaker, not damaging anything but effectively plunging the house into darkness with minimal effort or technical knowledge. Police found shoe prints in the mud around the shed and more prints near my back door, all matching common boot size that will be impossible to trace without a specific suspect to compare against. The rock that had struck Sarah was collected as evidence, though it was just a rock, no identifying features or source that would lead anywhere useful. Detective Morrison arrived about 30 minutes after the initial response, a seasoned investigator in his 50s who'd seen enough home invasions to know the questions to ask and the details to look for that might identify our attacker. He took separate statements from all four of us, then walked us through the timeline trying to understand whether this was random or targeted, whether the clown mask figure had been watching the house before revealing himself, whether any of us recognized anything about his build or voice or mannerisms that might identify him. The uncomfortable truth we had to acknowledge was that this had probably been targeted rather than random. The timing of the power cut, the knowledge of where the generator was located, the confidence with which the figure had entered my house and descended to the basement suggested familiarity with the property. Morrison's theory, which aligned with my growing fears, was that this might have been someone who knew me or had been inside my house previously for legitimate reasons. Someone who knew the layout well enough to navigate it in darkness and understood that the basement was where I'd likely retreat if threatened. We never identified the clown masked man despite investigation that included interviewing neighbors about suspicious vehicles or strangers in the area, checking social media for anyone who might have expressed hostility toward me, reviewing my work and school contact for anyone with motive to terrorize me. The mask was too common to trace, the boots too generic, the physical description too vague. He'd been smart enough to not leave DNA or fingerprints, had kept his voice muffled enough that voice recognition would be useless, had escaped quickly enough that even police response couldn't intercept him. My name is Nathan, and I was 17 on Halloween 2023 when my friend Joel and I made the terrible decision to ring the doorbell at the supposedly abandoned house on the corner of Birch Lane despite multiple warnings from neighbors who insisted nobody had lived there since early summer. Birch Lane was famous in our town for generous candy distribution. Most houses gave full-size bars rather than fun-size, and some families set up elaborate displays that made the street a prime trick-or-treating destination for kids from across town. But the corner house, a large Victorian that had been beautiful once but now showed signs of neglect with peeling paint and an overgrown lawn, had been dark and silent for months according to everyone we asked. The strange thing was that on Halloween night, while every other house on Birch Lane blazed with lights and decorations, the corner house remained mostly dark except for a single jack-o'-lantern sitting on the porch railing. The carved pumpkin glowed with internal light, its triangle eyes and jagged smile creating dancing shadows on the porch, but no other lights were visible in the windows and no decoration suggested the house was participating in Halloween festivities. Most trick-or-treaters walked past without even glancing at it, focused on the houses that were clearly welcoming visitors with lit porches and open doors. But Joel and I were 17, old enough that we weren't really trick-or-treating seriously anymore, but young enough that we still enjoyed the excuse to walk around the neighborhood collecting candy we didn't need and didn't really want. And Joel had a thing about completing challenges, about not leaving any house unvisited if there was even the slightest chance they might be giving out candy. "Come on," he said, gesturing toward the corner house. "That jack-o'-lantern is lit. Someone's home. We should at least check." An elderly neighbor, Mr. Chen from 3 houses down, overheard Joel's suggestion and called out a warning as he handed candy to a group of younger kids. "Nobody lives there anymore. Boys. The previous owner moved out in July and the place has been on the market since then. That pumpkin's probably just left from showing the house to potential buyers. Don't waste your time." His tone suggested he was trying to be helpful rather than mysterious, but Joel took it as a challenge rather than advice. If nobody's home, then there's no harm in ringing the doorbell just to make sure, right? I followed Joel up the walkway to the corner house, both of us aware we were probably wasting time but committed now to seeing it through. The jack-o'-lantern on the railing was indeed lit, but as we got closer I noticed something odd. There was no flame visible inside, no flickering candle creating the glow. Instead there was steady electric light, and a thin wire ran from the pumpkin's base across the porch floor and disappeared under the front door. Someone had wired the jack-o'-lantern with electric light, which suggested either very recent setup or the fact that someone was still coming to the house regularly despite it being supposedly abandoned. Joel reached out and pressed the doorbell, and we both heard it ring inside the house with a surprisingly loud chime. We waited, expecting nothing to happen, already preparing to turn around and head back to the well-lit houses where actual people were actually giving out actual candy. But then the door moved, not opened by a person, but just moved, swung inward about 6 inches on its own, creaking on hinges that needed oil, revealing darkness beyond the threshold and a narrow slice of the interior hallway illuminated by the jack-o'-lantern's electric glow. Joel and I looked at each other, both of us suddenly uncertain about this adventure that had seemed harmless 30 seconds ago. The door hanging open with no one visible behind it, the electric light instead of candles, the specific warning from Mr. Chen that nobody lived here, all of it added up to a situation that felt wrong in ways I couldn't articulate, but that made my fight-or-flight response tilt decisively toward flight. But Joel, stubborn and curious in equal measure, leaned forward to peer through the open door into the hallway beyond. "Holy shit," he breathed, and I moved to see what had caught his attention. The hallway wasn't empty as I'd expected. It was lined with plastic trick-or-treat bags, maybe 20 or 30 of them arranged in neat rows on the floor leading deeper into the house toward what looked like a living room. Each bag was identical, orange with black handles, and each one had a black bat sticker attached to its side. Someone had set this up deliberately, creating an invitation for curious trick-or-treaters to enter the house and take the pre-packaged candy waiting in the dark hallway. "This is fucked up," I said flatly. "We're leaving. Right now. This is not normal, and we are absolutely not going in there." But Joel had already taken one step across the threshold, his hand reaching for the nearest candy bag. "Relax. It's probably just some eccentric person's way of doing contactless candy distribution. We take a bag and leave. Simple." The moment Joel's fingers closed around one of the orange bags, we both heard a distinct sound from beneath the welcome mat just inside the door, a mechanical click, the unmistakable sound of a spring-loaded mechanism being triggered. Simultaneously, lights came on throughout the hallway, but not regular lights. Black lights, UV bulbs that made everything glow in shades of purple and white and made certain things invisible in normal light suddenly become visible. Like the footprints we could now see clearly on the hallway floor. Fresh footprints in what looked like luminescent powder, multiple sets of prints suggesting multiple people had been walking through the supposedly abandoned house very recently. And worse than the footprints, we could now see writing on the walls that hadn't been visible in the darkness. Messages scrawled in UV-reactive paint that glowed bright white under black lights. "Smile for the camera" on one wall. "Welcome to MY Collection" on another. "How many pieces of candy is your privacy worth?" written across the ceiling. Joel dropped the candy bag like it had burned him, and we both back away from the door rapidly, our phones coming out to document what we were seeing while also preparing to call police if the situation escalated beyond creepy into actively dangerous. Then came the voice, an adult male voice, speaking from somewhere deeper in the house, his words slightly distorted like he was using a voice modulator or speaking through a mask. "Only one per person, please. I'd hate for anyone to be greedy and take more than their share. The cameras are counting." The casual tone made it somehow worse than if he'd been threatening or aggressive. This person, whoever they were, was completely comfortable with the situation they created, had anticipated trick-or-treaters entering the house, and had built this entire setup to achieve some goal we didn't understand and definitely didn't want to be part of. Joel and I ran. No discussion. No debate about whether we should investigate further or try to see who was speaking. Just immediate coordinated flight back down the walkway to the safety of Birch Lane's well-lit sidewalk where normal Halloween was happening with normal people giving out normal candy in normal ways. Behind us, we heard the front door of the corner house close with a solid click, the jack-o'-lantern's light extinguishing simultaneously, plunging the porch back into darkness as if the entire interaction had never happened. We found Mr. Chen still handing out candy and breathlessly told him what we'd seen. The bags, the black lights, the UV messages, the voice speaking from inside the supposedly empty house. His expression shifted from skepticism to genuine concern. "I'm calling the police," he said, pulling out his phone. "That's not normal. That's not safe, and kids have been walking past that house all night. If someone's inside setting traps or filming people." He didn't finish the sentence, but we all understood the implications. Police responded to Mr. Chen's call and approached the corner house with a caution of officers who had been told about potential surveillance equipment and unknown occupants. They knocked and announced themselves, and when no one answered, they obtained emergency authorization to enter based on potential danger to children in the neighborhood. What they found inside confirmed our worst fears about what had been happening in that supposedly abandoned house while families walked past it on their annual Halloween candy routes. The interior was filled with technology. Cameras pointed at every entrance, monitors showing multiple angles of the porch and walkway, recording equipment capturing everyone who passed by and especially anyone who approached the door. The candy bags were rigged with RFID tags that would track which bag were taken and could theoretically be used to identify the children who'd taken them if the person running this operation managed to scan them later. The UV messages were designed to frighten and confuse, to create viral social media content if anyone recorded them and posted online. And in a back room they found printed surveillance photos of children from the neighborhood. Images captured over multiple nights and organized in a way that suggested obsessive documentation rather than harmless Halloween enthusiasm. The owner of the surveillance operation was never identified. By the time police secured the house and returned with a warrant to seize the equipment, someone had remotely wiped all the hard drives and erased any identifying information. The house's actual owner reached at her new residence 2 states away, confirmed she'd moved out in July and knew nothing about anyone using the property. The utilities had been illegally tapped, the locks had been picked or bumped, and someone had been using the abandoned house as a base for watching the neighborhood's children during the most vulnerable time of year when kids walked door to door in darkness. The black bat stickers from the candy bags started appearing on Halloween treat bags from other houses on Birch Lane over the next week. Parents finding them stuck to bags their children had collected, placed there by someone who'd been close enough to their kids during trick-or-treating to add stickers without being noticed. Whether this was the same person who'd set up the corner house surveillance or a copycat trying to spread fear, no one could say. But the message was clear. Someone had been watching the children of Birch Lane very carefully, had been close enough to touch their belongings, and had vanished before being identified or caught. My name is Amanda, and I'm a mother of 2 who learned on Halloween 2024 that the biggest threat to my family's safety wasn't strangers offering poison candy, but strangers studying the personal information we thoughtlessly throw away. I'd spent the entire week before Halloween preparing elaborate treat bags for the neighborhood kids, homemade cookies individually wrapped, full-size candy bars, little toy from the dollar store, all packaged in orange cellophane bags tied with black ribbons. And because I was a kind of detail-oriented person who thought personalization showed care and community spirit, I created custom labels for each bag with a child's first name and a cheerful Halloween message. The labels were my way of making trick-or-treating feel special and personal, of showing the neighborhood children that someone cared enough to know them individually rather than just handing out generic candy. I'd spent hours at my computer designing and printing 60 labels with names I'd gathered from the neighborhood Facebook group and from my own children Sarah and Michael's school directory. Each bag got a label, Happy Halloween Emma, or Have a Spooky Night Ryan, along with little back graphics of my family's last name at bottom so kids would know which house the treats came from. Halloween night proceeded normally. Children came in waves from 6 p.m. until about 9:30, parents accompanying younger ones and teenagers roaming in groups, everyone appropriately costumed and polite when collecting their personalized treat bags. By 10 p.m. I'd given away all 60 bags and was preparing to turn up the porch light and call the evening a success. My husband, David, was upstairs putting Sarah and Michael to bed while I cleaned up the remains of our Halloween distribution, empty candy boxes, spare ribbons, the label printer I'd used. Then at 10:47 p.m., well after typical trick-or-treating hours when most families were home counting candy and preparing for bed, someone knocked on our door. Not rang the doorbell, but knocked. 3 solid raps that seemed somehow different from the enthusiastic doorbell pushing of children eager for candy. I looked through the peephole and saw a figure on my porch, adult height, wearing a dark hoodie with a hood up and surgical gloves on both hands visible in my porch light. No costume, no children accompanying them, nothing that suggested this was a late trick-or-treater who'd missed the main hours. I didn't open the door immediately, speaking instead through the wood. "Can I help you? We're done giving out candy for the night." The figure's response came in a male voice, probably in his 30s or 40s, calm and conversational. "I'm not here for candy. I'm here to return something. One of your treat bags was given to my nephew by mistake, and I wanted to bring it back before your records get confused. The phrasing was odd. Why would my records get confused? Why would someone return a Halloween treat bag at nearly 11 p.m.? And why was he wearing gloves on a mild October evening? Against my better judgment, but driven by curiosity about what could possibly warrant returning a treat bag, I opened the door with the chain lock still engaged, creating a gap just wide enough to see the man on my porch more clearly and to receive whatever he was offering. He held up one of my orange cellophane bags, ribbon intact, label visible with Happy Halloween Tyler, printed in my custom font. "I believe this belongs to you," he said with a smile I couldn't quite see clearly in the shadow of his hood. I wanted to make sure Tyler's parents got the right one. The label has such specific information. Thought you'd want it back. I took the bag through the narrow gap, confused about why this was necessary, but trying to be polite to someone who was technically being thoughtful even if the late hour and gloves were unsettling. The moment my fingers touched the cellophane, I realized something was wrong. The bag was heavier than it should be, and through the translucent orange material I could see not just candy and toys, but something else. A card, white paper folded in half and placed on top of the treats. "What is this?" I asked, but the man was already stepping back from my door, his smile widening in a way that was visible even in the porch light shadows. "Just some information you might want to keep more secure," he said casually. "Your family's information has been very educational. You'd be surprised what people throw away thinking it's safe once it's in the recycling bin." He gave a small wave, disturbingly friendly, and walked off my porch toward the street where I now noticed an older sedan parked with its engine running. I closed and locked my door immediately, my hand shaking as I ripped open the cellophane bag to see what card he'd placed inside. What I found made my blood run cold and my stomach drop with a sick realization that we'd been vulnerable in ways I'd never considered. The card was actually a document, one of our old holiday cards from 2 years ago, the kind families send out with photos and year-in-review messages. On the back, written in neat handwriting, were notations. David, software engineer, leaves for work 7:15 a.m., returns approximately 6:30 p.m. Amanda, part-time bookkeeper, works from home Tuesdays and Thursdays. Sarah, 9, and Michael, 7, Lincoln Elementary, bus pickup 3:45 p.m. Our schedules, our routines, information compiled from trash and observation, and who knows what other sources. I ran upstairs to wake David, showing him the card and explaining about the man at the door. We immediately called the police while simultaneously checking on our sleeping children, both of whom were safe in their beds but whose safety now felt conditional and temporary rather than guaranteed. Officer Hayes arrived within 20 minutes, took the card as evidence, and listened to my description of the man in surgical gloves who had returned a treat bag specifically to deliver a message about our vulnerability. Hayes' expression grew more concerned as I explained about the personalized labels, about putting our family name on 60 bags distributed to neighborhood children, about how much information I voluntarily provided to anyone who took one of those bags. Hayes said carefully, "I need you to understand that someone has been conducting surveillance on your family, likely for several days or weeks. The level of detail about your schedules, the specific car they chose from what was probably multiple pieces of information they collected from your recycling. This wasn't random. This was someone studying you specifically, learning your patterns, and then using Halloween as an opportunity to demonstrate how much they know in a way that's technically not illegal but is absolutely threatening." Over the next 2 days, as police investigated and we reviewed our home security footage and tried to figure out who would target us and why, more returned treat bags appeared. Not at our house, but throughout the neighborhood. Parents contacted the police reporting that bags with our custom labels had been returned to their homes, each one containing personal information from their own recycling or mail. Bank statements, medical appointment cards, credit card offers, utility bills, documents people had thrown away assuming they were safely destroyed or that nobody would bother collecting trash to harvest data from suburban families. The investigation revealed a pattern of someone driving through our neighborhood on recycling collection mornings, pulling documents from bins before the trucks arrived, compiling dossiers on multiple families with children. The Halloween treat bags with their helpful name labels had provided verification. This bag was taken by Emma, so this data belongs to Emma's family at this address. The personalized touches I'd thought showed care and community spirit had actually created a directory linking children's names to home addresses, making it easier for whoever was collecting this information to organize their surveillance files. The man in surgical gloves was never identified despite canvassing the neighborhood and reviewing multiple doorbell cameras. The sedan he'd driven was traced to a rental car that had been returned the next morning, paid for with cash, rented using an ID that police suspected was fake based on the rental company's vague records. The data collection operation, because that's what police called it, an operation rather than a single incident, seemed to end after the returned bags appeared, but the damage to our sense of security was permanent. We had learned that privacy was illusion, that suburban neighborhoods were target-rich environments for people who understood how much information we discarded without proper destruction, and that holidays like Halloween, when strangers approached our homes and children walked our streets, created perfect opportunities for surveillance disguised as participation in community traditions. David installed a locking mailbox and a paper shredder that lived in our kitchen, making document destruction immediate rather than delayed. I stopped personalizing anything that left our house, stopped putting our family name on items we gave to others, stopped participating in neighborhood directories and Facebook groups where our children's names and ages and schools were casually shared. We taught Sarah and Michael about stranger danger, but also about information danger, about not sharing details about our family's routines or schedules or habit with anyone, even people who seemed nice or who claimed to know us. The return treat bag became an urban legend in our town, a story parents told each other as warning rather than entertainment. The Halloween when someone drove through collecting recycling and compiling dossiers on families, demonstrating how vulnerable we all were to attacks that didn't require breaking windows or picking locks but just required patience and attention to the information we thoughtlessly discarded. The holiday that's supposed to be about children and candy and harmless gays had been transformed into a lesson about modern threats. The predators who don't wear obvious masks because who don't need to enter your home because you invite them in every time you put documents in recycling without shredding them, who know your schedule and your children's names and exactly when your house is empty, armed with information you gave away for free by assuming trash was truly trash, rather than intelligence waiting to be harvested. I never made personalized treat bags again. The following Halloween we bought generic pre-packaged candy and handed it out without labels or family identification, just anonymous treats from an anonymous house like every other house on the block. And every Tuesday morning when recycling trucks came through, I stood at my window watching to make sure nobody was driving ahead of them pulling documents from bins. Nobody was studying our neighborhood with the patience of someone planning something we wouldn't understand until it was too late to prevent. Because a man in surgical gloves had taught us that the scariest part of Halloween wasn't ghosts or goblins or even home invaders with weapons. It was a quiet collection of data by people who understood that information was power, that knowledge of routines was vulnerability, and that suburban families broadcasting their lives through social media and personalized treat bags and documents in recycling bins were providing everything a predator needed to transform from stranger to threat, without ever announcing their intentions until the damage was already done.